Lexi eats the same lunch every day, at the same desk, in the same corner of the same floor she's worked on for years. A sandwich from home, wrapped in foil, sitting next to a laptop that's seen better days. Her coworkers walk past with takeout bags from the place across the street. $11 for a salad, $14 for a bowl, sometimes more if they add the extra protein. She smiles, says she's not hungry for that today, and goes back to her screen. She's been doing this for 22 years. Same building, different floor over the decades. Same 2014 Honda Civic in the parking garage, the one with the dent in the rear bumper nobody's bothered to fix because fixing it costs $400 and the car still runs fine. Same gray cardigan she's had since her 30s, soft now from 100 washes. Same metal water bottle, scuffed at the bottom, that's outlasted 3 different desks and 2 different managers. People notice these things without meaning to. A coworker mentioned once, not unkindly, that Lexi was stuck in her ways. Another assumed, out loud, that she probably couldn't afford to retire anytime soon. Why else would someone stay in the same role for over 2 decades, driving the same car, packing the same lunch, never once mentioning a vacation that sounded expensive? Someone in HR, years ago, half-jokingly suggested she might want to treat herself sometime, as though the cardigan and the foil-wrapped sandwich were signs of something gone wrong, rather than a choice made on purpose, over and over, for reasons nobody had bothered to ask about. Nobody asked her directly. Not for years. Office assumptions tend to work that way. They form quietly, get repeated a few times in passing conversation, and eventually harden into something everyone treats as fact without anyone checking if it's true. A story gets told often enough, and it stops sounding like a guess. It starts sounding like something everyone already knew. Her coworkers think they know her story. New hire, 24 years old, leans over one afternoon and says, half joking, half careful, "No offense, but are you doing okay? Money-wise?" Lexi laughs. Actually, she doesn't laugh right away. She pauses first, like she's deciding something, then laughs and says, "I'm doing better than okay." She doesn't explain. She never does. But here's what nobody at that office has ever seen. Her 401k statement. The one that came in last week. The one sitting unopened in a drawer at home because she already knows the number. $612,847. Let's go back. 22 years ago, Lexi was 26, making $34,000 a year at her first real job out of a community college program she'd paid for in installments. Rent was $780 a month for a 1-bedroom she covered entirely on her own. No roommate splitting the cost. Just her, alone, eating ramen more nights than she'd like to admit. She had $312 in her checking account, a balance on a credit card she was chipping away at slowly, and a job that offered something called a 401k match. She didn't know what that meant. Her manager explained it in about 90 seconds, standing in a hallway between meetings. Put in money. The company puts in money too. Free money, as long as you don't touch it. $300 a month. That's what she chose. Not because some advisor told her to. She didn't know any advisors. Didn't think people like her had advisors. Didn't even know that was a job some people had until years later. Because $300 was what was left over after rent, after groceries, after the bare minimum. And putting it somewhere felt better than watching it disappear into nothing the way the rest of her paycheck always seemed to. Her manager at the time, a woman named Patricia, who left the company 2 years later and whom Lexi never saw again, didn't make a big production out of explaining any of it. She said it the way you'd mention where the break room was. Useful information, delivered once, with no expectation that anyone would remember it later. Company matches 50 cents on the dollar up to 6%. It's free money if you put in at least that much. Up to you. Then she moved on to the next item on the onboarding checklist, a stapler and a parking pass and a login for the time tracking software. Lexi almost didn't think about it again. It sat in the back of her mind for 2 days before she pulled up the enrollment form on her lunch break, alone at her desk. The same desk in roughly the same spot she still sits at today. She remembers sitting at her kitchen table that night, the one with the wobbly leg she'd propped up with a folded napkin, filling out the enrollment form by hand because the online portal kept timing out. She almost wrote $100 instead of $300. Something made her cross it out and write the higher number. She couldn't tell you exactly what, just a feeling that if she didn't do it now, while it still hurt a little, while she was still young enough not to have a mortgage or kids or 100 other claims on every spare dollar, she might never do it at all. She folded the form, put it in an envelope, and mailed it back to HR the next morning before she had time to second-guess herself. She set it up once. An automatic deduction straight from her paycheck before she ever saw the money. And then, and this is the part that matters more than anything else in this video, she forgot about it. Not forgot like she didn't care. Forgot like it stopped being a decision. It just happened, every 2 weeks, quietly, in the background of a life that otherwise looked completely unremarkable. She never logged in to check it more than once or twice a year. There was no app notification, no daily ritual, no spreadsheet. Just absence, money that left before she could miss it. Year 1. $3,600 from her, roughly $1,800 matched by her employer at 50 cents on the dollar up to a limit. Total contributions around $5,400. The market did what markets do, up some months, down others, a few weeks that made the evening news for reasons she doesn't remember anymore. By the end of year 1, her account sat around $5,650. Nobody's impressed by $5,650. Lexi wasn't either. She remembers checking the balance exactly once that whole year, in December, mostly out of curiosity, and feeling a small, quiet satisfaction before closing the laptop and moving on with her evening. But here's the math nobody shows you, the part that makes this story different from every other save more money video you've scrolled past. Money invested doesn't just sit there. It compounds, meaning the money she put in starts earning its own money, and that money earns money too. And over decades, the earnings outgrow the contributions entirely. It's slow at first, almost insultingly slow. And then, somewhere past the decade mark, it stops being slow at all. By year 5, she'd contributed $18,000 of her own money. Combined with employer match and market growth averaging close to 9% annually over that stretch, her balance had crossed $34,000. Still not a number anyone brags about at a dinner party. Around this time, Lexi got her first real raise, up to $41,000 a year, and gave herself permission to bump her contribution slightly to $325 a month. It barely registered as a change in her day-to-day spending. She didn't notice the difference in her checking account. The account on the other side noticed. By year 10, this is 2014, the same year she bought that Civic, used for $11,200, talking the dealer down from $12,500 over the course of an exhausting Saturday afternoon. Her contributions totaled $36,000. Her account balance, $94,300. The gap between what she put in and what she had was starting to widen in a way that, if she'd noticed, might have surprised her. She didn't notice. She was busy. Life was happening. A parent's medical bills 1 year that ate through her emergency savings entirely. A brief stretch of reduced hours during a slow period at work. A wedding she helped pay for. Through all of it, the $300 a month, by then closer to $325, never stopped. That's the part people skip over when they hear stories like this. It wasn't smooth. There were years she wanted to pull that money out, badly. A car repair here, a dental emergency there, a month where rent went up $150 and something had to bend. She didn't touch the $401k. Not out of superhuman discipline. Out of a quiet decision she'd made early on that this particular account simply wasn't on the table. It existed outside the rest of her financial life, like it belonged to a future version of her that she didn't get to negotiate with, no matter how reasonable the negotiation might have sounded in the moment. By year 15, in 2019, her contributions totaled $54,000. Her balance, $187,000. Somewhere in that decade, without a single dramatic moment, the compounding had quietly taken over. The growth from market returns was now larger, year over year, than anything she was personally contributing. She crossed six figures sometime around 2017 and didn't notice for almost 4 months because she still wasn't checking. Then 2020 happened. The market dropped almost 34% in 5 weeks. Lexi watched her balance fall from $187,000 to $134,000 in a matter of days, the fastest and largest drop she'd ever seen on that screen. Everyone around her was panicking, coworkers pulling money out of their own accounts, moving everything to cash, swearing off the market entirely. One coworker, a man 2 cubicles over, sold nearly everything in March and didn't get back in until late summer, missing most of the recovery. Lexi didn't move anything. She kept contributing into an account that was actively losing value in front of her because the alternative, selling at the bottom, locking in the loss, was the one thing every piece of advice she'd ever half listened to told her never to do. By the end of 2021, that same account sat at $241,000. The man 2 cubicles over never fully recovered the ground he'd lost by selling in a panic. By year 2024, her contributions totaled $72,000 across 2 decades, including the gradual increases she'd made along the way as her salary crept up to $58,000. Her balance had reached $478,000, $406,000 of that, the overwhelming majority, wasn't money she'd put in. It was growth. It was compounding doing, slowly and invisibly, exactly what it does, the same way it had been doing it for 20 years without ever once announcing itself. Around the same time, a different coworker, the one with the newer SUV, the one who took 2 international trips a year and always had the newest phone the week it released, mentioned during a team lunch that he hadn't been able to put anything into his 401k in years. Too tight, he said. Maybe next year. He said it lightly, the way people say things they've said before and stopped feeling bad about. Lexi didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say in that moment that wouldn't have sounded like judgment, so she just nodded and let the conversation move somewhere else. That's the part of this story that's easy to miss if you're only looking at Lexi. The contrast wasn't really between Lexi and obvious financial struggle. It was between Lexi and people who, on paper, looked like they were doing better. Nicer car, newer phone, more photos of trips abroad. None of that is wrong, exactly. Money is allowed to be spent on things that bring a person joy, and nobody's life should be measured against a spreadsheet. But the gap between how someone's finances look and how they actually are is often wider than anyone standing nearby could possibly guess, in both directions, all the time, everywhere. Which brings us back to last week, and the number sitting in that unopened envelope on her kitchen counter between a stack of mail she hadn't sorted and a grocery list written on the back of an old receipt. $612,847. Of that, Lexi personally contributed roughly $79,200 over 22 years, a number she actually had to calculate because she genuinely lost track somewhere around year 15. Employer matching added somewhere around $39,600. The remaining $494,047, more than 3/4 of the entire balance, came from growth. From money, making money, year after year, while she ate sandwiches from home and drove a car with a dent in it that she still hasn't fixed. Here's the uncomfortable math for anyone doing the comparison in their head right now. A coworker making the same salary as Lexi, who spent that same $300 a month on lunches out, on a slightly nicer car payment, on the version of life that looks more successful from the outside, that person has spent roughly $79,200 over the same 22 years. Gone. Not invested. Not growing. Just spent, the way money is supposed to be spent, on a life that looked, day to day, more comfortable than Lexi's. Lexi's $79,200 became $612,847. The coworker's $79,200 became $11 salads and a car that's been traded in 3 times since 2014. This isn't a story about deprivation, and it's worth being careful here, because it's easy to hear a number like that and assume the person behind it lived some kind of joyless, sacrificial existence for 2 decades. She didn't live without. She took a handful of real vacations. She helped her parents when they needed it. She went to weddings and bought gifts and lived something close to a normal life. The difference was never about how much she had to spend. It was about one decision made at 26, repeated automatically for 22 years, that nobody around her ever knew about because there was nothing visible to see. No flashy purchase to point to. No announcement at a holiday party. Just a number quietly multiplying in an account she almost never opened, sitting underneath a life that looked, from every angle anyone could see, completely ordinary. There's a specific reason this works the way it does, and it's worth being precise about it, because the precision is the whole point of this video. A 401k match is, mathematically, the closest thing to guaranteed free money that exists in personal finance. If an employer matches 50 cents on every dollar up to a certain percentage of salary, turning down that match is the same as turning down an immediate 50% return before the money has even been invested in anything. Most financial advisors will tell you nothing else in the market reliably offers that. Not real estate, not a hot stock tip from a relative, not anything you'll see promoted on social media. A guaranteed 50% return handed to you for doing nothing more than checking a box during onboarding. Most people who skip it don't skip it on purpose. They skip it because nobody explains it clearly during the rush of a first week at a new job, buried in paperwork between a parking pass and a health insurance form. Lexi almost skipped it too. The only difference is a manager who happened to mention it in a hallway, and a version of Lexi who happened to be listening. Then there's the matter of time, which matters more than almost anything else in this story and gets talked about the least. Compounding doesn't reward people who invest the most. It rewards people who invest the longest. $1 invested at 26 has roughly twice as long to grow as $1 invested at 46, assuming retirement around 65. That's not a minor difference. At typical market returns, doubling the time roughly quadruples the eventual value, because growth compounds on growth, not just on the original amount put in. The dollar invested at 26 isn't just earning interest. It's earning interest on interest on interest, year after year, in a way that becomes almost impossible to catch up to later, no matter how much more money someone tries to contribute starting at 40. This is the part that should genuinely bother anyone watching who's in their 30s or 40s and hasn't started yet. It's not that it's too late. It isn't, not even close. It's that the math gets harder, not impossible, every single year that account sits empty. Lexi's coworker, the 24-year-old who asked if she was doing okay, he makes $61,000 a year now, more than Lexi made starting out 22 years ago, even adjusted for the era. If he started putting away $300 a month today, with similar market conditions, similar employer matching, similar discipline to leave it untouched through downturns and emergencies, and the temptation of better lunches. By the time he's Lexi's age, today's $300 a month, contributing for the same 22-year stretch, would likely put him in a strikingly similar position. Not identical. Markets don't repeat exactly. Conditions shift. Nobody can promise the next 2 decades behave like the last 2, but close enough that the underlying math holds. He has time Lexi no longer has. That's the actual asset in this entire story, not the $300, the decades. The $300 was never really the hard part. Plenty of people spend more than that on subscriptions they forgot they're paying for. The decades are the part that can't be bought back, borrowed, or made up for later, no matter how much money eventually shows up to try. It's worth saying plainly what this story is not. It's not a suggestion that everyone making $34,000 a year should have done exactly what Lexi did. Every situation is different. Every emergency fund matters more than long-term investing until it actually exists. And $300 a month is a meaningful sacrifice for plenty of people, not a small one. Someone carrying high-interest credit card debt at 22% APR is, mathematically, better off paying that down aggressively before maxing out retirement contributions, because guaranteed savings on 22% interest beats an uncertain 9% market return almost every time. This isn't about guilt, and it's not a one-size-fits-all formula. It's about visibility, about the fact that the most financially significant decision in Lexi's adult life produced a result so quiet that the people sitting 6 feet from her for 2 decades had no idea it existed. There's a version of this story playing out right now in thousands of offices across the country. Someone making an unremarkable salary, driving an unremarkable car, eating an unremarkable lunch, and quietly, automatically becoming financially secure in a way that has nothing to do with how their life looks from the outside. And there's an equal and opposite version playing out too. Someone who looks far more successful, with a newer car and a nicer apartment and vacation photos that get more attention, who has nothing set aside at all, because every dollar that came in went straight back out before it had a chance to sit still long enough to grow. Neither version announces itself. That's the part that makes this so easy to miss in real life, even when you're standing right next to it every day. If there's a practical takeaway buried in all of this, it's smaller and less dramatic than the $612,847 number makes it sound. It's not invest exactly $300 a month. The number matters less than the decision to make it automatic and the decision to leave it alone. It's checking whether an employer offers any kind of match at all, because an unclaimed match is the single most common form of money people leave behind without realizing it. It's understanding that the first 10 years of any retirement account will look unimpressive almost no matter what, and that the unimpressive years are not evidence that it isn't working. They're the years where the foundation gets built quietly before the growth becomes visible to the naked eye. And it's accepting that the version of this decision that works isn't the one made with perfect timing or perfect market knowledge. It's the one made early, kept boring, and left alone through every year it would have been easier not to. Lexi still hasn't told anyone at work the actual number. She's not hiding it out of secrecy or superiority. She just hasn't found a version of the conversation that doesn't sound like bragging, even though nothing about the last 22 years felt like winning while it was happening. It felt like ordinary life. Rent, groceries, a car that needed an oil change more often than she'd like, a paycheck that came and went the way paychecks do twice a month, the same as everyone else's. The $300 left her account before she ever had the chance to spend it on something else. That's the entire mechanism when you strip away everything else. Not a secret strategy, not a stock pick nobody else knew about, not a system anyone was deliberately hiding from her coworkers. Just time, an automatic decision made once at a wobbly kitchen table, and the discipline to never treat that account as optional, even in the years it would have been completely reasonable to. The 24-year-old who asked if she was doing okay still doesn't know the number. Maybe he never will. Maybe, 22 years from now, someone younger will ask him the exact same question, in the exact same tone, assuming the exact same thing. And he'll pause, the way Lexi did, before deciding how much of the truth to give away. $612,847. Built from $300 a month, 22 years, a kitchen table with a wobbly leg, and a coworker 2 cubicles over who still has absolutely no idea.